Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today I want to give you some spooky book recommendations since we're just a couple of weeks out from Halloween, and I think it'd be fun to have some horror books, some thriller books to round out the rest of the spooky season. I did do a video like this last year, so I will link that in the cards above and in the description down below so you can check out even more recommendations from me. And I also did, if you're looking for something less scary, less spooky, I did a fall books recommendation recently, so I'll also link that in the cards above and in the description down below, so if you can go check that out if you're wanting something a little less scary. As with my fall book recommendations, I'm also going to mention at the end of this video a few books I haven't read yet, but I'm really excited to, that I think are going to be great for spooky season as well, so those are just kind of books that are on my radar. But to start, we're going to go ahead with my quite substantial stack here of scary books I've read in the last few months that I've absolutely loved and that I think you'll enjoy too. The first two picks that I have are, I think, kind of easy, obvious picks because a lot of people have been reading and loving these. But the first one is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, which is I would say almost horror comedy. It's really more horror, but it has some comedy elements that I think are really interesting in it. But it's kind of a horror comedy retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. And it involves a lot of mushrooms, so if you don't like mushrooms, and if you didn't like Mexican Gothic because of the mushrooms, I'd say maybe steer clear of this one, but this is, I think, a really fantastic retelling that follows Easton, who is a soldier, and they receive a letter from a childhood friend mentioning that his sister is very sick, and so Easton rushes over to their home in the House of Usher and discovers upon arrival that Madeline is incredibly sick, but Roderick, her brother who sent the letter, is also overtaken with what's described here as a malady of the nerves. He seems to be becoming very paranoid and he's not sleeping well. He's acting very strange. And so Easton is trying to unravel this kind of mystery. And there's also a couple of other characters, an American doctor and a British mycologist, who get involved in the situation. And it's just a really fun mystery. There's a lot of humor in it. As I said, I think it's almost horror comedy. It's not quite leaning into the comedy enough for that genre, but there's a lot of funny stuff in here that would take me by surprise. I found myself laughing a lot while reading this, but also I think that the horror elements are very spooky, they're very creepy, and there were a lot of moments here where I was on the edge of my seat because I needed to know what happened. And I think it's just a really fantastic retelling of a classic story. The next one to mention is Nitrate by Sylvia Miranda Garcia. I feel like this one is another obvious pick because this is the same author as Mexican Gothic. She's very popular. She is one of my favorite authors as well. But I think this one is also one that's been popular recently because it came in the first Evernight box from Illumicrate, so I think a lot of people have been reading it for that reason. But this one is a very slow-paced horror set in 90s Mexico following Montserrat, who is a sound engineer, and Tristan, who is her childhood friend, and he's an actor. And the two of them are kind of at lulls in their careers. Things aren't really going well for them. But then Tristan moves into a new apartment and meets one of his neighbors who turns out to be the director of some of their favorite horror movies from the 60s. He was kind of this cult classic horror director, and then his last film was never finished. And upon meeting him, he tells them that the movie was cursed, and he asks them for their help in finishing it so that he can break the curse. I think it's such a fascinating book that really engages a lot with the history of the film industry, particularly the Mexican film industry, and it talks a lot about film technology, which I think is really fun. This is also just, I think, generally a very historical novel. I would say it leans much more into the historical aspects for maybe the first half to 2/3 of the book, and then the horror is very much in the latter part, although there is a lot of rising tension throughout the first sections. This is a very slow, very historical horror book, and I think it's really fascinating. It is also very much a character study of Tristan and Montserrat and their friendship, and I think that it's just a really fun story. There's film technology and Nazi occultism and kind of witchy magic and fantasy elements and just all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And I think it just does a really good job of building dread and building tension because it is very slow and it is very focused on the characters. But by the time that I got to the horror elements near the latter part of the book, I was so on edge because there had been so much tension being built up and these things that were just kind of starting to go wrong that were just unsettling enough. They were I don't understand what's going on, but I need to know. And I just think this is a really fun story, and I really like the way that the relationship between Tristan and Montserrat kind of develops across it. I think that their friendship is really interesting, and it's just, I think, a fantastic book from an author that I love, and I cannot more highly recommend Silver Nitrate. For the next book, things go wrong very quickly. This is very much the opposite. This is You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kaylin Barron, which is my first book I've read from this author, and I will definitely be reading more from her. This was so good. This is a YA slasher thriller novel about this young girl whose name is escaping me, Charity, I can't believe I forgot her name. Anyway, Charity, who is playing the final girl at a full contact horror experience at a summer camp over the summer, and she is loving it. She thinks this is fantastic. She's done this for a couple of years now, but this particular summer, things start to go wrong when her coworkers begin to go missing, and it starts to look like she might actually have to be a final girl. I think this is fantastic. I really enjoyed the directions the story went. There's also a sapphic relationship in here that I think is very sweet, and I was interested in the ways that that relationship developed, but also just like the whole cast of characters I think is very fun. The friendships are interesting. There's a lot of like teen drama, and it's, I think, fascinating that it's a story about characters who know what genre they're in and do everything they can to do things right, and things still go wrong for them. And I just think that that is really, it adds a lot to the horror in this book, because you're seeing characters who are, they aren't being stupid. They're not doing the thing of like walking alone into the dark basement, but they're still having to deal with a situation they aren't able to escape. And I just loved the tension in this book. I really liked the way the mystery played out. This went in directions I would not have at all expected, but I thought were really interesting. And the end of this book literally had like my jaw on the floor. I was so shocked at the twist at the end of this book. There's one twist that I guessed, but there is a second twist that I did not guess, and it just totally blew me away. I loved this. I had so much fun reading it. Probably helped by the fact that I also read this at a cabin in the woods over the summer. So I got the spooky atmosphere as well, but this was just like so much fun, and I will absolutely be picking up other books from Kaylin Barron. The next two books I have here are novellas, and they're also books that I read at the same kind of cabin in the woods situation that I read You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight. And the first one I want to mention, I guess the one I read first, was The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw, which is a very weird little novella, and I know that this author's previous book, Nothing But Black and Teeth, has had very mixed reviews. It has like a 2.4 or something on Goodreads. I'm in the minority. I really like Nothing But Black and Teeth, but I acknowledge that it's a very weird book, and it kind of keeps you at arm's distance. I think this book is quite different. It has a very different feel to it than Nothing But Black and Teeth did. It also is across a longer time frame. Nothing But Black and Teeth is like a single evening. This takes place over like a week or two, but this one is following a mermaid and a plague doctor who are leaving a kingdom in ruin after the mermaid's children have destroyed it, and they go on this little adventure together, and their relationship develops as they encounter a weird village full of creepy children and these three people that the children call the Saints. It's very weird. It's very like if that weird village in The Witcher 3 with the creepy kids and the three witch ladies, if that was like a book. This reminds me a lot of that, and it's just a very strange story. It's very much about the relationship between the mermaid and the plague doctor and the ways that that develops, but also the creepy kids are very creepy, and there's a lot of medical horror in here as well, which you might be able to guess from there being a plague doctor involved, but there is like really gruesome medical horror and body horror in here that really caught me off guard. I wasn't sure what to expect going into this, and it was definitely not that. But I think it's a really interesting story. It's an odd one. This was not one that I rated like 5 stars or anything. I think I gave it like 3.5, 4 stars because there were some sections I think near the beginning that were particularly confusing. This is a weirdly quiet story for what it is, and so I think it's just a really interesting experience. The other one is also very short. This is The Scorge Between Stars by Ness Brown. Again, read it in the same spooky cabin situation, and this one is a kind of sci-fi horror that I think is reminiscent of Alien. It's about this woman named Jacqueline Allwright, who is the acting captain of the Calypso, which is a colony ship trying to return to Earth after the failure of its colony, and she's trying to deal with like the political situation on there. They're running out of resources, things are going very, very wrong, and then they find out that there is an intruder on the ship, and she has to deal with that situation as well. I think this is a really great story. It is very Alien-like. I think it wraps up just a little too neatly at the end, but if you want something that has the same vibes as Alien, this is it, because this was such a good like creature feature Alien story. Next up I have the last kind of a recent release I want to talk about, and this is Soyi by Junji Ito. This is my favorite Junji Ito I've read so far. This one is following Soyi, the titular character, who is a like 5th to 6th grader who's just super weird and creepy. This is just a series of stories about this little kid being weird and creepy at people, and he seems to almost have some magical powers at points. He does some things that are like unexplainable. He behaves very oddly, and none of it ever really gets explained, but I think it's fun. It's not as intense and gory and horrific as some of Junji Ito's other work. It doesn't ever go quite as far as that, and I think that works for the age of this character. But I think it's just like a fun set of stories about this weird little kid and the things that he gets into, the shenanigans he gets into that unsettle and disturb his family. The last two recommendations I have for you are both older books that came out several years ago, but they're ones that I read recently and particularly liked. First of all, Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. I'm always going to like recommend something by Stephen Graham Jones. I think his writing is really interesting and compelling. Anyway, it's about this young boy who is growing up with his family. They're werewolves, and he is approaching the part of his life where he will find out if he is also a werewolf or if he's going to be kind of dismissed from his pack. And it's just a really fascinating, like, coming of age story about this kid dealing with being different from his family and like wanting so desperately to fit in, but he also is in this weird situation where, because they're werewolves, they're also like constantly moving around, and it's just a really interesting story about this kid, and I think he's a really compelling main character. I really felt for him at all the different things that he was experiencing, all the different difficulties he experienced in his life. There's a lot of stuff about like grief and loss, but also about like conformity and wanting to find a place to belong. I just think it's a fascinating story, and it does have some horror elements. It is pretty gruesome and gory at points, but I think it's just more focused on this kid than it is on the horror aspects, and I think it's a really fun version of a coming-of-age story. Then this last one I have to mention is just deeply weird, and this is Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy. This isn't like horror per se, but it's like dark literary fiction. It's a little bit apocalyptic feeling, and you don't really have a sense of where or when this book is set, and it's just very strange. I don't think I can say I enjoyed this book, but it was an interesting reading experience, and it stuck with me because I still think about this book a lot. But I can't really give you much plot synopsis or summary for this because I'm not sure that there is one, but this one basically follows this brother and sister whose names I can't remember, Culla and Renthi, I think, who have a child together, and then when the child is born, the brother takes the child into the woods and leaves it, and then comes back and tells his sister that the child is dead. She doesn't believe him and goes on an adventure to try and find the child, and he follows after her, having discovered, like, kind of late that she has disappeared. And so it's about the two of them on this, like, very weird quest. Her questing after the baby, him questing after her, and the very different interactions they have with people along the way. Also, there's these, like, 3 spooky strangers who are causing chaos in the countryside, and it's just a deeply weird book. It feels like an allegory, but I'm not sure what it's an allegory for. It also has, like, lots of biblical references in it, so it's a really interesting, weird experience, and if you want something kind of literary and weird, I'd recommend this one. Also, it's very short. I read that one fairly quickly, I think in, like, maybe a day or two, and I don't know what else to say about it other than it's stuck with me, and I'm not sure I'm glad it has, but it has, and so I'm going to recommend it to you so you can have this stuck in your head too. So those are all of my recommendations, and now I want to talk about a few books that I'm excited to get to in this, hopefully, this spooky season. First of all, I have Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt, which is a horror book about these 3 friends who went into a house several years ago, and only 2 of them came out, and now the 2 that survived are going back to figure out what happened to their friend. I've heard so many good things about this, and that the house is like a metaphor for all kinds of interesting things, so I'm very excited to be picking this one up, and I am hoping to get to some like spooky place, spooky house stories this year, so this is going to be perfect for that. On a similar note, I want to read Linghun by Ai Jiang, which is a book about a weird little town where people go when they want to be haunted. And it's a town called Home, all caps. And it just sounds super weird, and I don't know anything beyond that about it. So I'm really excited to dive into this and see what it's like. I think it's a book about like grief and loss and trying to learn how to let go. And I think that's going to be really interesting. It's probably going to be pretty hard-hitting, and I suspect it's also going to be a little confusing because I read a couple of pages of it, and it seems like some of the characters don't have names, or they have, like, weird names. Like, there's a character who's only referred to as Mrs. without, like, a name. So I'm curious to see what this one's going to be like, because I really don't know what to expect, and I picked it up totally on a whim at my local Barnes & Noble. Then I have Maplecroft by Sherry Priest, which is a book that's basically what if Lizzie Borden was a monster hunter, and the murder of her parents was actually an attack against some sort of entity that had taken them over. I think it sounds like it's going to be really interesting. I like these kind of, you know, what if historical figure was a monster hunter kind of stories, and I think it's just going to be like a fun one for spooky season. The last one I have here is Lone Women by Victor Laval, which is about a woman who flees California to become a homesteader in, I think, Montana, and with her she has this steamer trunk that she never opens, and there's some sort of secret about her past that's in the trunk, and also some spooky things start happening while she is homesteading in Montana. I don't really know what to expect from this. I don't know anything about the plot beyond that, but I have seen a few people whose reviews I really trust talk about how much they love this book. In particular, Mara from Books Like Whoa and Bethany from Beautifully Booked Bethany, I think both reviewed this as pretty highly. I can't remember what their reviews were, but I seem to recall that both of them like this book a lot, and I really trust their reviews, so I'm very excited to get to this one, and I think it's going to be a really interesting and different read for spooky season this year. So that's basically all I have for you today, and I really hope you found something to pick up for these last few weeks of the spooky season. I also really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting every Tuesday and Saturday, so there is more content coming soon, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.